Well, we're getting down to the end of the Gospel of Matthew, and in this chapter, a heap of action is going to happen. Peter chopping the ears off people, Mary pouring oil all down Jesus' legs, Judas betraying the Lord. A heap of stuff's going to happen. I want to compare in this chapter Mary, Judas, and Peter. Not Mary, Jesus' mother, not Mary Magdalene, Mary, the sister of Martha. I want to compare these three people in this chapter and think about how they understood the Lord's death. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's read Matthew chapter 26. Now, Matthew chapter 26, by the way, is the second longest chapter in the New Testament. It's 75 verses, so hang in there as we read it through. When Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. They took counsel together that they might take Jesus by deceit and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest a riot occur among the people." Now when Jesus was in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him, having an alabaster jar of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when his disciples saw this, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? This ointment might have been sold and given to the poor." However, knowing this, Jesus said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? She has done a good work for me. For you always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me. For in pouring this ointment on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Most certainly I tell you, wherever this good news is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of as a memorial of her." Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" So they weighed out for him 30 pieces of silver. From that time he sought opportunity to betray him. Now, on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain person and tell him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" Now when evening had come, he was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples. As they were eating, he said, "Most certainly I tell you that one of you will betray me." They were exceedingly sorrowful, and each began to ask him, "It isn't me, is it, Lord?" He answered, "He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man goes even as it is written of him, but woe to that man through whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who betrayed him, answered, "It isn't me, is it, Rabbi?" He said to him, "You said it." As they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks for it, and broke it. He gave it to the disciples and said, "Take and eat. This is my body." He took the cup, gave thanks, and gave to them, saying, "All of you drink it. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for the remission of sin. For I tell you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on, until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me tonight. For it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered.' But after I am raised up, I will go before you into Galilee." But Peter answered him, "Even if all will be made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble." Jesus said to him, "Most certainly I tell you that tonight, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all of the disciples said likewise. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and severely troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went forward a little, fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass away from me. Nevertheless, not what I desire, but what you desire." He came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "What? Couldn't you watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you don't enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again a second time he went away and prayed, saying, "My Father, if this cup can't pass from me unless I drink it, your desire be done." He came again and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. He left them again and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Arise, let's be going. Behold, he who betrays me is at hand." While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and clubs, from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who betrayed him had given them a sign, saying, "Whoever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him." Immediately he came to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, why are you here?" Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. Behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I couldn't ask my Father, and he would even now send more than 12 legions of angels? How then would the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so?" In that hour, Jesus said to the multitudes, "Have you come out against me as a robber, with swords and clubs to seize me? I sat daily in the temple teaching, and you didn't arrest me. But all of this has happened that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled. Those who had taken Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were gathered together. But Peter followed him from a distance to the court of the high priest, and entered in and sat with the officers to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and the whole council sought false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death, and they found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This man said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said to him, "Have you no answer? What is this that these testify against you?" But Jesus stayed silent. The high priest answered him, "I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. Nevertheless, I tell you, after this you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of the sky." Then the high priest tore his clothing, saying, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Behold, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered, "He is worthy of death." Then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ, who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the court, and a maid came to him, saying, "You were also with Christ the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." When he had gone out onto the porch, someone else saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those who stood by came and said to Peter, "Surely you are also one of them. Your speech makes you known." Then he began to curse and to swear, "I don't know the man." Immediately the rooster crowed. Peter remembered the words which Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And then he went out and wept bitterly. Long chapter, and a lot in it. We won't have time to talk about it all. The chapter starts in Bethany. Bethany is a town just down the hill from Jerusalem on the road to Jericho, about 1 or 2 miles away. It's actually the town where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived, and Jesus would often stay with them when he came to visit Jerusalem. He's actually, in the start of this chapter, having dinner with Simon the leper. Now, Simon wasn't a leper, obviously not a leper at the time they're having dinner with him, The thought is that he was a leper at some point in the past and Jesus healed him, and now he's showing hospitality to Jesus. So they're in his house, but it's like just down the road from Mary, Martha, and Lazarus's house. And there's a lady here in this house who's pouring oil on Jesus' feet. It's Mary. It's Mary, the sister of Martha, Mary, the sister of Lazarus. She's the one. She's not named here in this, but it's in other chapters of the Bible, in other books of the Bible, we figure that out. In the Gospels, some of the stories appear in other Gospels and you get varying perspectives. So you're able to read all the stories and get a more full, complete picture. And so, it's Mary who pours an alabaster jar of oil all down Jesus' feet. We find out from a different Gospel that this jar is worth a year's wages. And in the Gospel of John, it says the whole house was filled with the scent of the perfume. Now that's a memory. John is writing that in the Gospel of John, and he's remembering the whole house. He was there. The whole house was filled with the scent of the perfume. This is a strong perfume. And she's poured it all over Jesus' feet, and she's wiped his legs down with her hair. To me, this scene always felt really awkward. I remember watching, I watched and listened to Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical. It's a kind of a rock musical, like it's 70s, 80s music, Andrew Lloyd Webber. I really enjoy the musical. It doesn't follow the Bible super closely, and so there's things that are wrong. But this scene is in the musical. And Judas has things to say, and Jesus ends up screaming, "Leave her alone!" And but it's scandalous because here's a woman, and Judas is like, if he knew, it's you imagine, coming to church and your pastor is there, and a woman comes out of the crowd and starts rubbing his legs and pouring perfume on them and using her hair to dry them. It's just a little weird. And but there's something really sweet about it. And it's taken me years to kind of start to get the feeling of this. And it only really twigged to me this week preparing this chapter. Part of it was that it just never really twigged that this was the Mary that was the mother of Martha. I never really twigged that this is who this person was. This is the Mary that in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus went to visit their house and she sat at Jesus' feet listening to him. Martha is the one in Luke's Gospel who's busy preparing all the food, and Martha says to Jesus, "Don't you care how busy I am? Don't you care that she's left me to do all the work? Tell her to help," kind of thing. I get the feeling, I'm doing all the work, she's doing nothing. But for Mary, and Jesus says, "Leave her alone. She's doing what's better." Jesus found someone who actually listened to him. Now, it's hard to make this point because how do I make this point? Way back in the early Gospel of Matthew, Jesus was telling parables. And in the parables, he tells a parable that to the crowds, but he doesn't tell the meaning to the crowds. So later on, the disciples say, "Explain to us the meaning of the parable." And so he explains the meaning. At that point, the disciples are listening to him because there's something about their hearts that's they want to understand what Jesus has said and what it meant. So they have a listening heart. It's not just about hearing the words, it's about wanting to know what they mean. And then when you hear what they mean, believing them. But as the Gospels go along, the disciples don't do that all of the time. So for example, Jesus says to them, in a few days, we're going up to Jerusalem and the Son of Man will be handed over and crucified. So Jesus said things like that to the 12 disciples, but it seems like they didn't get it. Now, they no doubt heard the words he said, but they didn't do what they did before. They didn't go back and say, "When you said that, what does it mean?" And so they didn't realize he was actually going to die. So even though we've got many examples of Jesus telling them I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be raised up again. Even in this chapter, he says, he told them that in 2 days from now, the Son of Man is going to be handed over, and then he's going to be raised up and he'll go ahead of you to Galilee. He even told them he's going to be alive and live back to Galilee. They don't get any of it. But there's somebody who does. And I never realized that until this week. Mary is the lady who sits at Jesus' feet. Martha's busy in the kitchen. The disciples hear Jesus say things about his death, but they don't want to bring up the subject. They don't understand it, but they don't want to get it clarified. Mary knows. It doesn't say here that she knows, but she knows. And she thinks about the Lord, and she has a big heart for him. And all she knows to do is go and get her perfume and anoint him. She knows he's going to die. She goes off to her house, which is just down the road, and she comes and she pours it on Jesus' feet and she anoints him for burial. And she just has the biggest heart of love for Jesus, and she knows what's going to happen. The disciples don't get it, but she knows. And the disciples say, "What a waste. What a waste of perfume." And Jesus says, "Leave her alone. She's doing it for my burial." In other words, Jesus is saying she knows what's going on. She's thinking of me. She's showing me love. Cut the woman a break. Leave her alone. And when I realized that she's doing this out of such a big heart of love for Jesus, it's not weird at all. Now, it's weird if you don't realize that, but here's a woman that just loves Jesus. And she doesn't know anything else to do but get her most expensive perfume she's probably saved up for years. She was probably saving up for her wedding. That perfume was probably for her wedding day or something. And she gives it to Jesus. She gives her all of her best to him. And, I thought about it, in the Gospel of John, Jesus going to her house, Lazarus dies, and Jesus comes to their house, and this is John chapter 11, Jesus says to Mary, he will live again. And Jesus says to her, she says, on the resurrection day? And Jesus says, no, I am the resurrection and the life. So Jesus has got this conversation going on with Mary, and Mary comes to see death and resurrection the way Jesus sees it, not the way others are seeing it. So Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. So Mary personally sees Jesus raises my brother from the dead. And then Jesus says to her, I'm going to die, but I'm going to raise again. She believes him. And then she goes and anoints him for burial. It's the sweetest thing of all. It's selfless. It's a heart full of love for Jesus. And I reckon if there's any person in the Bible you want to be like, it's like her. And then there's two others in this chapter. Peter. Now, he loved the Lord too, but he didn't get what the Lord was saying. And he never thought to ask. He never thought to get clarification. He listened, but he didn't really listen. And so he ends up denying the Lord because he tries to serve the Lord in his own way without understanding what the Lord really needs. And then there's the third person, Judas, who's only thinking of using the Lord for his own benefit. He's not thinking of serving the Lord at all. And there are these three types of people in churches. There are people who love the Lord like Mary and just do anything for him, giving up all of their lives. Then there are people who love the Lord and they serve the Lord as best they can, like Peter, but they do it their own way, but it's still something. But then there are people who are in church and they use the Lord to get stuff. They use the Lord to get ahead, like Judas. And they're the three types of people, I think, that you can bump into in churches. And of course, you bump into people who don't know the Lord, don't care as well. Which type of Christian are you? Well, to be honest, I think I'm a bit like Peter. I think I'm a bit of in the middle. I love the Lord. I want to serve him, but I want to be more like Mary and hear his voice and know him well. We have a Jesus, a Saviour that went to the cross for us. He broke bread and said, this is my body for you. This is my blood for you. He's done it all for us. He's a good God. Why wouldn't you want to follow him back? Why wouldn't you want to be like Mary? I reckon you should go back to the Bible. You should read the Bible, but be like Mary. Look at the things Jesus has said and believe him when you read it. Lord, I want to thank you for this chapter, a long one, but a great one. Let the words of God fill our hearts, I pray. We want to be more like Jesus, but as Christians, we want to have that attitude that Mary had of being listeners and hearing what you have to say. Help us, Lord. Amen.